How do you feel like Democrats on a national level have been doing in championing all of those issues that you care about and that you've laid out?
Yeah. So I think the good work is being done at the federal level. So if you look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Chips and Science Act, there have been many investments which can bring additional jobs, have a better economy, more investments in really important parts of our future. And some of this money has been coming to Georgia. But I would say we need to, first of all, make sure we're well positioned to accept that money and investment in our futures, such as transportation or manufacturing and things like that. But there's also work that we should be doing at the state level, which can't necessarily be done at the federal level. For example, expanding access to Medicaid is something we can do only at the state level, and we need to do that. And additional, other things around reproductive rights, public safety, funding of schools, all these things we need to make sure Georgia does. So the federal government can only do so much. We have to play our part in terms of what we're willing to support.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you could see yourself having long-term ambitions to, represent Georgia on a federal level, or do you feel like you want to do something else rather than stay in politics for the rest of your career?
I think for this particular race, the impetus which made me jump in was looking at what's already there, Shawn Still, and how we need people with integrity in public office. And my goal is, if elected, to serve Georgians and to see how best to serve Georgians in the future. And at the moment, I think a lot of that work needs to be done at the state level, and I'm committed to make sure I do that work first.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to go back a little bit to talk about your focus on election security. So I know that's what your focus was when you studied computer science. So can you talk to me a little bit about why you decided to do that? Was it because you're from Georgia and, Georgia's always been in the forefront of championing voters' rights, or what inspired you to study that?
Yeah. So I would say, when I studied computer science, I was more broadly working on web development, cybersecurity as well. I think what got me really interested in it was initially taking a tech ethics class over at Stanford, where we learned about, the fact that when you're building code and stuff, just like building a startup making a lot of money, there's so many implications in terms of what you build and what you build it for. So people need to be careful in terms of what technology you build and how it's deployed. So that's where I got more interested in learning about the whole government tech scene, where there's a lot of technology that the government builds or needs to build. And whether it's built well or not, really affects the lives of millions of Americans. Look at, for example, healthcare.gov, and how initially wasn't very well, and then eventually it became much better. So that all of that made me interested in working for the government. And I started working in the government in 2020 on cybersecurity, and that was one of the biggest issues that the agency was working on. So I worked at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, CISA. And yeah, at the time, that was a huge issue because people realized that, in 2016, there were all these questions around election security, and thinking about how do we make sure we really secure our elections and help states to do so. So that's kind of what made me interested in it. It was the topic that needed the most help. There were only a handful of people at the federal level working on it. It was just starting up then, so it was a great time to get involved.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, in your work at CISA, it has been a lot of controversy, I would say, around the agency from conservatives when it comes to censorship. I'm just curious if you have heard any of those criticisms and what you would say to people who have doubts about the agency's legitimacy.
Yeah, I would say if you look at CISA's mission, right? CISA's mission is to protect the resiliency of our critical infrastructure and also cybersecurity. So what that means is that sectors like defense, health, manufacturing, elections as well. And it's really about forming these partnerships and sharing information with both public and private partners to make sure that our nation CISA has been doing. That's their mission. And everything they've been doing has been to that aim. How do we share information? That's what CISA has been working on. If others want to politicize that work, that's unfortunate. But this work is really important. It's nonpartisan. It's done by dedicated civil servants, and we need more of it. In fact, CISA was actually created under President Trump in 2018. And when I was at CISA, I worked under both President Trump and President Biden. It's unfortunate that when President Trump, after he lost the election, he decided to start criticizing CISA's work. But we need, I think, politicians who are more dedicated to integrity and look at the work for what it really is, not just when it suits them or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, my last question for you is that if you were to win, your win would be in many ways a first for the Georgia State Senate, and particularly you would be the first Gen Z member of the Georgia State Senate. So what do you say to people who say you're too young or you're underqualified for this role?
Yeah, well, I would say if you look at the history of our country, many of the people at the founding fathers' time were in their 20s. It's not unprecedented to have people who are young and involved in politics. And in fact, the fact that there aren't that many people who are Gen Z shows that we need more people who can bring those voices to the table. We can't just have the same people who have been around for decades and decades. We really need new voices to be brought to the table. That's how we can really focus on the issues that matter to us most. It's just because you're young doesn't mean you don't have experience. And being a fresh voice to the table means that you're able to really listen to people more. And that's really important, I believe, in politics.
Thank you so much for joining me today.